VenomousStare back with a StarCraft video. We're talking about the new patch today. And to be clear, this isn't a patch that has gone live in the game affecting everybody. This is what's called the PTR, the Public Test Realm. It's basically a mod that Blizzard puts out that allows the people that play the game, that are hardcore about the game, to go into a private match and add this mod, the PTR mod, and test the new changes. So these are sort of the proposed balance changes, and a lot of people did one of these patch videos right out the gate, and I've been sort of under the weather for a couple of weeks, to be honest with you. But I've actually seen a ton of pro games on this PTR. Been watching a lot of Scarlet stream. She's been playing other pro gamers on the PTR, so I sort of have a sense of what the people have been doing on the PTR and how the changes look, instead of just being like, oh, they're decreasing the ultra size. That's a good change. Like, which that's true, but it's like based on what? Well, I've seen quite a few pro games at this point, so that's what I'm going to be making my judgments on. So without further ado, let's jump into the patch. So the creep tumor, they're nerfing it down. And what does this really come down to? Because the creep tumor has been a staple of StarCraft 2 and Zerg defense since the Wings of Liberty beta. It's something that's not in Brood War, and it's incredibly powerful. It gives vision, it makes all your stuff faster, and there are a ton of different styles that you really have to have creep spread all over the map to play effectively. Any hydra styles, because hydras are so slow. Mutiling, Baneling against Terran, you're going to need good creep spread to fight the Terran. Liquid TLO once said that creep spread is the most important thing about TVZ. So the creep tumor being nerfed is a huge deal. Anytime creep gets nerfed, that's a huge deal for Zerg. Anytime the queen gets nerfed or buffed, that's a huge deal for Zerg. One of the biggest patches in StarCraft 2 history was in summer of 2012, when both the queen and the overlord got buffed in the same patch. And that sort of ushered in the dominance of Broodlord and Fester, because from the beginning of the Wings of Liberty beta up until that patch, Zerg was super flimsy because the queen was very bad. The queen had a jokish 3 ground defense range. If you ever watch old Wings of Liberty VODs or my Venomous Classic series, you see the queens just like can't even like do a ranged attack really, unless it's against air, and the anti-air range was also lower. So the queen is one of the most important units in StarCraft 2 history, unlike in Brood War when the queen is a joke. And the creep tumor is so important because it's so powerful, and at the beginning of the game, a lot of Zergs could be harassed so easily and the maps are so small and the queen wasn't good enough, where creep spread didn't really run out of control. Then you had the Heart of the Swarm era where there were still some more unique maps, but Terran really had a lot of different tools to put the pressure on. And then you're sitting multiple years into Legacy of the Void, and all the maps have been cookie cutter for the last 7 seasons. Really only Pillars of Gold is one that will really change how you play that much. So these top tier Zergs, these macro Zergs, have gotten so good at these multiple queen openings and just spamming creep everywhere. I think Scarlet, for me personally, has always had the best creep spread. Not on this patch or the one before it, but talking about back into Wings of Liberty, Scarlet's the one player who spreads the creep fastidiously all throughout the map the best and will constantly respread the creep. And she's always so good about fanning the creep to the maximum amount and using as few tumors as she can to get the most creep on the map. Some of these pro gamers will lay like 10 tumors in the same direction, like towards the middle of the map, and just spread them all. Scarlet's always creeping the back path, always not only creeping the middle, but creeping the side bases, and it's just way harder to play against. And that's the sort of player that they're nerfing creep down for. Scarlet's the sort of player who you play and it's like, wow, there is creep all over the map. And even when I kill it, it just gets respread. It's so frustrating. I feel like I can't push out. I feel like I can't do anything. They're trying to like nerf some of the odious, overpowering effect of creep back. And A creep has been mastered to the point where it's just a terrifying thing to deal with if you're Terran especially, so I can sort of see why they're doing that, although I'm not a fan of it because for me personally I'd love to spread creep. It's probably the most fun thing about playing Zerg. A lot of playing Zerg is just over droning and dying, and a lot of preventing that is spreading creep, so I get why they're doing it, like for the pro scene, but not a fan of it personally. So they are changing the amount of creep that comes out of a structure initially, which isn't a big deal except for like against 2 racks. And they're changing all of the buildings to have hive vision range, which is irrelevant. So they're nerfing down the Viper slightly, where when you cast it has to sit still, whereas now you know like your Vipers run forward and you spam a bunch of abducts, and you can like shift click back or just get ready to spam click back, and the Vipers will run forward and yank and insta run, and now they sort of like run and they cast. It's just a small nerf to the Viper, is I feel like Blizzard, one thing they sort of try to patch against is, oh, this is a thing that is so hard to play against and so damning and so fast. And they added a lot of that in HOTS, and they added a lot of that in Legacy. And so much of Legacy of the Void is these things where seemingly if you make one mistake it does so much splash or is such a big deal it's very hard to come back from. Like if you miss an Oracle, it runs in and kills so many workers. Well, Oracle's been used so much for so many years, the pros never really miss an Oracle or take that much damage to a mine drop. But if you're like in Diamond and below, those things are very punishing and are very frustrating to deal with. So that's one thing I think that Blizzard like says that they like to patch out is stuff that's really crushing like that. But I think everyone knows at this point StarCraft 2 has way too many of those things in it, and people have been saying for years that it should be more like Brood War, and the fight should take longer and it shouldn't just be so fast. And I think if you go back and look at Wings of Liberty, a lot of the games play a little bit slower and more like Brood War, and that's more fun to watch. Whereas at this point StarCraft 2 is like very mapped out, but the damage being taken is one of those things where it's just like, Jesus, that's it. Like he didn't see the mines come in, he was looking at his natural when the Terran flew in with Ignite Afterburners, another thing that's like more punishing if you're trying to defend against it, and all of his workers are dead. Well, with the Viper I think they're trying to get rid of like, oh, he's just running in and yoinking my stuff. Vipers are very good against Colossus styles, but every time I see the Viper used now, it's against these very easy to play, very easy to abuse mass air styles, and it's just the Zerg saying like, I'm gonna get kited with hydras, you nerf the queen, and the Corruptor is one of the worst units in the game since Wings of Liberty, so I have to go Vipers. So to me, I don't like to see these extremely long-winded, easy to play like turtle air styles with mass carrier and battery, which it's bad in 1v1, but in 2v2 it's essentially made the game unplayable. And if the player is smart enough to add High Templar, you're just screwed, like Viper nerf or not. So I don't think that that style is good or fun to watch. I don't think it should be promoted like a turtle carrier air style. It's the same as like a turtle Broodlord style. The Broodlord style is way harder to get to. You've got to get all the way up to Hive. You've got to survive anything that Terran or Protoss can do to you, or even Zerg. But with the carrier style, with batteries, it's really not that hard to get up into a few carriers. Then it just becomes not only ludicrously difficult to deal with, but a very boring game to watch, and a very boring game to play. And it's one of those things where if you really want to deal with it against someone who's really going to make batteries and cannons and not push out, except to do a little harass, you're not going to be able to deal with it unless you go Viper. So I don't like to see the Viper nerfed in that sense. But I think against like Terran, Mech, and like normal Protoss ground and pound, it's like, oh yeah, the Viper's sort of annoying to deal with, but against the carrier, it's all Zerg has, and if the Protoss just builds a few High Templar, then the Vipers can't really do that. And then the High Templar counter everything else Zerg can make. Oh, Hydras. How do Hydras do against Storm? What about a big flock of corruptors? Why don't you think people go mass corruptor? Storm Archon. You don't need very much Archon and Storm to counter Infinity Corruptors. So they nerfed the Viper down a little. And here's what they did to the Ultralisk. They made it smaller, and they say, oh, you reduced size by 12%. Like, what does that look like? In game, it's pretty funny. The Ultras look pretty small now, and Ultras were unusable in late game except to defend, because the Ultra was so clunky and could never get in the range of the things it wanted to attack. Even with Lings and Infestors, the Ultra was just terrible, running off of creep, trying to attack into PFs, trying to attack into wall-ins, trying to attack into batteries. The big dumb Ultra would just run around and not even get an attack off, even if you were microing well. It was a worthless unit. Really, we've only seen the Ultra useful in 2 points in StarCraft 2, and I mean really useful, not like, oh, you make 30 Broodlords and they transition to Mass Viking and then you go Ultra with like your money float after you've starved them out. I mean, like, you can go into it as your first option, and it's more like a Brood War Ultra, where you can really run in and get damage done, and it means a lot. There are 2 times in StarCraft 2 where the Ultra has been good. From the Wings of Liberty beta to like 2 months into Wings of Liberty, because there was a bug where when the Ultra swiped and hit something, whatever got hit, the stuff around it would have splash damage done to it. So 2 Ultras could run up and attack a PF, and it would damage a turret that was placed next to the PF, like on the mineral line side, on the opposite side where the Ultras were attacking. And obviously, like, that splash was supposed to be done in the main cleave. They just messed it up. Well, it sort of allowed big, dumb, clunky Ultras to actually do, like, some splash damage, even if it wasn't sort of how it was supposed to work. And then the other time was in Heart of the Swarm when they gave Ultras 2 additional armor right out the gate. So even if you hadn't gotten any upgrades all game, they'd come out with 0-2. So what would happen was you would usually have 2-2 when you went into Hive, and then when your Ultra Cavern finished, the Ultras would come out at 2-4, which is a lot of armor for especially Terran to deal with. But you could still get the armor upgrade, and you could also get +3 Carapace still, which you're usually researching. So then your Ultras could have up to 7 armor, which was just insane. Because whenever you think of the Ultra, it's supposed to be like the big tank unit. The tank unit that can like run in and sponge all the damage and allow you to finally attack as tier 3 Zerg. Because so often you're just defending. As you're teching up into Hive, you just have to defend whatever Terran and Protoss are throwing at you. And the Broodlord is one of the most like boring, uninteresting, irritating to play with and against units in the game. Free units aren't fun. So you want a metagame where the Ultra is the choice for the Zerg. You only want Zerg to have to go into Broodlord to break a turtling player. And the Ultra has been so bad, especially aggressively, where Zergs are forced to go into Broodlord. No one wants to watch that shit. That's why like Ghost meta is so good, is because the Ghost counter spellcaster, because of the huge EMP that got nerfed this patch that we'll talk about. But also Snipe was good against all the big, dumb, slow, clunky Zerg units, so we want to move towards an Ultralist favored metagame and not a dumb Broodlord metagame that's boring. So the Hydra. Muscular augments move speed increase. So the Hydra got a much needed move speed buff. This is just like a terribly slow, clunky joke unit that is just brutal to use. And they increased the basically like rate of fire for the Hydra. And it's not actual rate of fire, like how fast they shoot, but it's basically like stutter step time. Like they're more microable now. And why you would phrase this as range slop makes no sense to me. It's crazy, they make only a handful of patches a year now, and they almost all have spelling errors in them or phrased in some moronic way. I think they added this, like after like hours of people asking. Or, okay, I was reading the wrong thing. The range slop is the ability, for the Ultras to like swing and for stuff to be able to move away from it. And what I meant to read was damage point reduced. Yeah, damage point reduced, which is what I was talking about, where they're more microable, and you can A move and they'll A move and you can move again before before it was like, oh, they're gonna attack. Okay, it'll be like a whole cycle. You know how slow they were. It's brutal. So they're increasing the speed of the Broodlord. You might be asking yourself, 1.97 to 2.3, how much is that? Not much. They look almost exactly the same. The Broodling, they're decreasing the duration. Basically, like, when people go Broodlord, they don't want like a million Broodlings to be there, which, whatever. It's sort of like they're going in the right direction. Like, I like the Broodlord being faster and it being a little bit less annoying. Because the way the Broodlord works now is like any good player is going to run around and drop the shit out of you and turn the game into an extremely annoying, like, tank run around fest, and they want to get Ghost or Air and kill your Broodlords. Well, the Broodlords are so slow where once you make them, it's sort of just like, unless you make mass static defense, they're going to move around. But if you do start to attack them, a lot of times if people don't have the right comp, they just die, right? So they're trying to make the Broodlord a little bit less good up front as far as battling, but a little more mobile, which is good. Because as it stands, it's just interminably slow. And if you get surprised by Broodlords and they do get on your side of the map, a lot of times it's like, well, I just don't have enough stuff to deal with that. So, step in the right direction. Then the Ravager, they're they're increasing the build time from Roach to Ravager, which, like, the one thing I think about when I see this is like that old like Polish Zerg cheese where they'd like proxy a hatch at your third and make 3 roaches, make them all Ravagers, and then run up and buy all your add-on down. That it probably affects that cheese, and it affects builds where people are going Ravager and they do a big attack and then want to, after they clear your army, and want to make Ravagers, like make their Reek Roaches into Ravagers and make a big wave of Roaches to push you again. It'll affect that because a lot of times you're making Ravagers right there, like by the opponent's third or in a big battle line where you just fight and they can remass and might push again. So your Ravagers could get pushed again while they're making. And the other thing I really think about is when you see a big attack coming, like a tank push, and Zergs are always trying to pump stuff out at the very last second, and the Zerg player says to themselves, like, oh shit, okay, my roaches just popped, I need to make Ravagers, and the Terran's like pushing up into your third and sieging the tanks, and it's like, come on Ravagers, finish. That's the other thing I can think of, is the Ravager being made right there when an attack is hitting. That's the one I think that is going to like mean the most and break Zergs, but I don't really play a lot of aggressive Ravager styles, so. The shield battery, they're nerfing down, good. Anyone who's played against it knows like how cartoonish and cheesy it feels. And a lot of times, it's one of those things, sort of like when the Infestor could cast Fungal while burrowed and Zergs just like didn't understand how good it was and take advantage of it enough before it got nerfed. Like, a lot of Protoss players will make multiple batteries, but I've seen so many games where, whether it be versus Terran or versus Zerg, where the Protoss knows that their third is going to be attacked, and they'll make 1 or 0 batteries, and it's like, you do realize that your natural is buttoned up, they can't attack into it effectively. The army they're attacking with can't drop, so they're going to attack your third. The battery is so insanely good, like make 3 or 4 of them, and then your army just won't die. And what we saw was, whenever the battery would be overcharged, it was just cartoonish, and one of the most like obnoxious and insane things ever to play against. You would be attacking a single unit, like an Immortal, with like 10 roaches and some hydras, and you would get a full volley off, and the overcharged battery would just like heal it back to fucking max shields instantly. You get another whole volley off and get it down to like mid health, and then it's insta full health again. And God forbid if Protoss players were smart enough to make multiple batteries, and then you had a couple batteries working away normally on the rest of the army with the supercharged one, forget about it. But the supercharged battery was just out of control. And the battery itself was really good. One thing I hate is how good the battery has made your ability to button up to backstabs and ling run-bys in late game ZVP. Before, you could make multiple cannons, and with the warping ability too, with like DT warping and zealots, you were very good at protecting against counterattacks, but if you weren't diligent about making cannons, then you could still be counterattacked in late game ZVP. Now, with recall at every nexus and the shield battery, it's almost impossible to counterattack a Protoss and catch them off guard. It's just so insanely forgiving to play ZVP in this meta, especially if you're going a big dumb air style and have access minerals, and you can just afford to make it a couple extra cannons, couple extra batteries at every base. That was really the only way that Zerg could play against these mass air styles, was running lings around and attacking in multiple spots and taking advantage of how slow the army was, similar to how I spoke about Broodlords being fought against earlier, and now you've made it too easy for Protoss to defend. And it was already like a real easy race to defend with. So it's good that they're nerfing the battery down, because it was just cartoonish for so long. Just ridiculous. Like, I don't know how someone not only came up with that idea, but they put that in the game and saw how good it was and was like, yeah, let's leave that. Some of these scenarios you see are ridiculous, where it's like 2 units holding off 30 plus units. Like, oh, I'm going to make a pylon right after I make my third base, and then put a battery next to it, and then park like 2 adepts or a couple of adepts and a sentry in that little wall between the battery. It was just disgusting. And then like, oh, the Zerg make 40 lings. I have batteries, it doesn't matter. That was ridiculous. And conversely, like, look how good these things were in cheeses. Like, the battery was just too useful overall, so I'm glad it got touched up a little. The Observer, its mood speed got increased, which is good, because it's sort of, Observers always seem like they're just way too slow. But then the model size got increased, which makes it easier to see, I guess. Like, I heard a joke that like an Observer looks more like a Banshee now when it's cloaked, which is sort of true. The Archon can now fit between single gap walls. Really what this is a buff to is recall. I like that you can like make Archons in your main to defend Muta Harass, and then you can get out of this like your natural wall. But really what this is like someone panic recalls their whole army and it goes into the main or natural, and then they can't get their Archons out. This is what that comes down to. The High Templar, the move speed is increased, which I saw like this hilarious comment from this Twitch chatter that was like, well, with the EMP nerf, now the High Templar can dodge the EMP because it got a speed buff, which is just hilarious. This is nice. The High Templar can keep up with your army a bit better, but it's not that big of a deal. It's just more of a quality of life thing. The Disruptor got nerfed. I think people got to the point where they could throw those out, especially like against a ground Zerg army, and like what was Zerg gonna do? Like Terran can stim and split or pick up into medevacs, but it's like, okay, I'm fighting, and he threw 3 disruptor balls at my Roach Hydra. Like, where am I gonna go? I can't burrow, it'll still hit. But remember when the disruptor was first introduced and it was almost seen as like this unit that was like too gimmicky to use or too difficult to use? And now people have used it so much and gotten so practiced with it that it was just ridiculous. And in terms of, if you forced a fight and could get the opponent to commit, in terms of if you pushed up into the third and they couldn't run away, it was ridiculous. Now, if you were being chased and there was Terran Marines stimming at you and they could split and dive your disruptor, then it didn't feel that good. But if you boxed your opponent in and threw those disruptor balls out, it felt fucking strong. It was good. And we saw pro gamers really understand the power of these, and they also got more disciplined. They wouldn't throw them all out at once, and then the Zerg or Terran could just run in, or even Protoss. What they did was they throw one out, and then, okay, the other guy wants to force a fight, I'll throw one out. And then they would always have 1 or 2 in their back pocket in case the other player tried to force the issue. So it's interesting to see how the meta evolved with that one. Interceptor shields reduced from 40 to 3. Good. The carrier is just ridiculous, and anytime you fight against it, the problem that you have is when you fight it, 90% of the time is spent attacking interceptors, even if you know what you're doing and you're trying to focus fire. If you have like a hydra army, forget about it. And that was why I was saying earlier you have to have vipers. Well, they're changing the interceptor priority, so now if you A move and fight carriers, all your units won't just ridiculously attack interceptors. And then interceptors' flying radius around target increase so they don't stay so close to the carrier. This is good. This is useful for pro, and I know they balance for pro matches, but just like as a sidebar, someone who plays a lot of 2v2, it is to the point where they should just like disable the Stargate in 2v2 or make it where the Void Ray and the carrier are significantly more expensive, because you can't play a single game on that server and see a Protoss and not just face this mindless air abuse. And if it's to the point where it's really bad in 1v1 and it's ruining all the ZVPs, and every ZVP you see, the Protoss can know they can go into this easy to execute air style and get to that max, that finger of God composition with Templar very, very easily. Then it's like, not only is the onus on the Zerg to break the Protoss before they get there, but they can't do that with Hydras because the battery is so good. Hydras are so bad off creep, and if the Protoss is smart enough to make more than 3 gateways and make a little bit of a ground army with some speed zealots, you just can't go Hydras. Like, in what world does going mass Hydras work? Like if they go slow void rays and move them around the map without any observers or vision and they get caught out and they just blew their recall. That's another thing, is it's like you can play like a total moron if you're Protoss and you still have recall to bail you out. At least before it was like, okay, well I have to have my mothership core with me, and if it gets sniped, then I'm fucked. But I can also leave my mothership core for like overcharge defense, and it's a decision you had to make. Now with battery and recall, you're just fucking buttoned up to anything all the time. It's very unfun to play against if you're Zerg or Terran, and you're trying to split a Protoss apart, not just fight their powerful army the whole goddamn game. So, the Disruptor got nerfed. That's mostly against Terran. The carrier got nerfed. The Sentry build time reduced. I mean, whatever. How often do you ever see a Sentry made? I guess that's like to help stop cheeses, and you can also hallucinate Scout. I guess that's a good change. The upgrades got buffed. They take a little bit less time to research. That'll affect the Terran matchup mostly. Okay, the Ghost. This is big. So the enhanced shockwave upgrade was removed, which gave EMP radius from the default 1.5 to 2. You got this every game if you were going to go Ghost. It was insanely good. And now they split the difference. The Ghost comes out with an EMP radius that is between what it originally was and you had with the upgrade. Now it's 1.75 and there just is no upgrade. And now Snipe, which they call steady targeting, is cancelled if a unit moves way far away. Whereas before, like as long as the Terran casted the snipe and didn't get aggroed, you could run all the way across the map with a Ling and the snipe would still land. Now, when they fucking snipe your Broodlords, they're still gonna die. But if they snipe a bunch of roaches and you're running away on creep, some of them will get away, I guess. Banshee speed, they reduced the build time and reduced the cost. That's fine, no one ever got that at the pro level. And if you went 2-port Banshee and tried to get this and Cloak at the same time, you never really had the money to get that and 2 Banshees at once, even if you cut all the corners. You just barely swing it. So now they're trying to just bring back 2-port and just like speed Banshees versus Zerg, which is good. They switched the Cyclone around just to be a little bit better versus all units. Whatever, that'll make it way better against Zerg, obviously, because all Zerg stuff is bio. Zerg obviously has armored units too, but obviously there's more armored stuff with Terran. Sensor Tower they nerfed because after 12 fucking years, Terrans finally realized how good the Sensor Tower was, even if you just like made one at your third. And now the Sensor Tower range is smaller, and you have to make a few of them, which good Terrans were also doing anyway. So then they reworked the Raven. They made the build time way shorter. They decreased the Gauss cast. They bumped up the starting energy. And they nerfed the disruption matrix, the interference matrix that you see in TVT and against Colossus. They nerfed the armor missile. They got rid of that stupid energy upgrade nobody liked. And they made it where you needed more energy for an auto turret. So this might be sort of perplexing, but this is really what this comes down to, is that you can get a Raven faster and cheaper, and the abilities aren't as good. So what this really counters is those Protoss openers where they get blink and a fast observer and pressure your main and threaten to blink in and always have you on the back foot. Now the Terran can get a defensive Raven, and it's not this big like 200 gas pain in the ass investment that if it gets sniped you're just fucked. Now you can work in a defensive Raven more quickly, and one thing I really saw is against Zerg, people are doing those Raven openers where they just get a Raven with their Hellions. Just gives them so much map control, saves them so much scan. I love those openers. Very intelligent play to do that. And with the Banshee buff too, a lot of guys are opting for that Raven and then going into Banshee right after. This patch is a nerf to the Ghost Turtle style that a lot of players like Juggernaut Jason are employing, where they make you know extra PFs to defend, multiple sensor towers to defend. They've got a ghost everywhere with snipe, and as Zerg you just can't really attack effectively. They have really taken a bite out of the catch-all ability of the ghost, and they're making sensor towers a little bit less oppressive, but they're giving Terran more options as far as the Banshee goes. So DT, they're undoing the buff. They're undoing like the Shadow Stride nerf they should have never done. Widow Mines they're making more consistent. Cyclone they're doing like a little bit of a buff to like when you pick up the Cyclone in a medevac, and it's like a TVT buff really. And then Factory they made it where your stuff doesn't get stuck as easily. They fixed an issue with the battery where you could spam S, like you could click the battery and spam S for stop to make it go faster. Again, a bug that should have been patched out in the week that was there forever. Queen fixed an issue where initial creep tumors could be cancelled, so this was a nice like a quality of life change. Fix an issue where Hydras attack faster at melee range. Let me tell you, if something was within melee range of your Hydras, it was going to be dead anyway. But that is pretty much the patch. So you can manually cancel snipe too. So as far as what we see here, the Ultra, the TLDR is like the Ultra is going to be better, especially against Terran. It's going to be more usable. And Creep's going to be less oppressive. The Hydra's going to be a little bit better. It's funny, like the Hydra is shitty and clunky for years and years and years. They do a tiny little nerf, and then Protoss and Terran players always say the same thing. It's like, whoa, the Hydra's crazy. And as a Zerg, you're sort of sitting there and saying to yourself, like, wow, the Hydra's not terrible. It's not like a prohibitive pain in the ass, unfun, shitty unit to use. And then it gets nerfed again. So the Hydra got a little more usability. Broodlord got buffed in the right way, but it also got its sort of attacking part of its kit nerfed, which is good. Like Broodlords need to be quicker where you can actually move them around, and they probably can afford to be a little less powerful. The Ravager nerfed down a little bit, that's fine. But yeah, that's the patch. I like most of these changes. Protoss got hit with the nerf bat, which like I love the battery overcharge being nerfed. It's like the best thing in this patch. I love to see that. And the ghost needed a nerf. The ghost was just fucking out of control. And I like that they changed the Raven again a little. Anyway, they've been doing everything they can to get freaking Terran players to make the Raven forever and ever. Sub for more.